Well, welcome everybody to another interview in our series of our endorsed candidates. We've got David Olson with us, who is our endorsed Spokane GOP endorsed candidate, as well as the Washington State GOP for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Very important role. David, thanks for being with us today and welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate being on today.
You bet. You bet. So, David, tell us about yourself, your background, and why you are running for this important position.
Just a quick background. I know a lot of people have met me across the state and at the convention and so forth, but I went in the military right out of high school. I was just an average student, went in the Navy kicking and screaming after high school, thinking I'd just do one tour. I went in and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I went in as an electrician. After a couple of years, I became a Navy diver and an underwater welder. I had the pleasure and the fortune to be able to travel all over the world. I got to live in Hawaii and Guam and Italy and Puerto Rico and Korea. So my wife and family and I got a chance to live all over the world and see school districts that were really good and see school districts that were not so good. So it gave us and myself a unique world view as we traveled around the world. So that was something I really believe has been helpful to me, to have that diverse background of being able to see so many different parts of the world. And I think that's been an influence on how I handle myself on my local school board. I got out of the Navy in 2005 as a chief warrant officer, became a defense contractor for about 7 years, traveling around the world again, places like Iowa and Djibouti and all kinds of different weird places, not weird, but not like the United States, like Djibouti, really interesting place. But so additional parts of the world. We settled here in Gig Harbor into the Peninsula School District. My wife was a school teacher for many years. My youngest son's a school teacher. But what got me interested in being on the school board here was going around and visiting my kids in school, parent-teacher conferences, wrestling matches, different kind of sporting events. I noticed that some of our school facilities weren't in great shape. So I started going to school board meetings to see what was being done about it. I wasn't really happy with the progress. So I decided to run, put my money where my mouth was and run for school board. But that was 11 years ago. And I've had the honor of being reelected multiple times by my local community. I've also served as a county commissioner, for a while doing our charter review. And in my time on the school board, I dealt with the McCleary decision, the levy swap, which was a terrible bill. I was the president of the school board during COVID and all the drama that went with that. I've been on the school board through all the funding issues that are affecting our state. School boards going bankrupt, turning their school district over to the state, Moses Lake firing hundreds of teachers. So I've been through all that. I'm a public finance banker now, so I have a background in understanding how to read public finance budgets, where a lot of school board members across the state don't know how to do that. So, but the reason I ran for superintendent of public instruction is that over my 10 plus years on the school board, and specifically Chris Reichdahl's 8 years as superintendent, I've watched academic performance in the state just go downhill every year, worse and worse and worse. 10 years ago, when I was on the school board, Washington Public Schools were ranked number 8 in the country. Now we're ranked number 27. And that's just absolutely not okay with me. Across the state, on average, less than 50% of the kids can read and write at grade level. My school district is above average. We have about 73% of our students can read and write, which in order to get that 50% average, there are school districts out there that only 30% other kids can read and write at grade level. Less than 30% of the kids across the state can pass their math and science. And so Chris Reichdahl has not been focused on the academic prize, has been more focused on politics in the classroom that I and others across the state disagree with. He's been pushing policies and procedures and regulations into the classroom that's taken away teacher instruction time, which is devices to learn rather than traditional building relationships between the teacher and the student. I want to get back to that and trying to come up with a plan to have a blend of teacher one-on-one instruction as well as using digital devices. But it's a little about me. I've been married for 26 years, and I have I have four kids. They all came up through public school, and I have one grandkid, and they live in Yakima. So little quick rundown about me.
Yeah, that's great information. And I can attest, as being a former school board member, actually, and being on the State Board of Education, David has been a constant person and advocate in the legislature. He knows how that system works. And so everything that David said, I know to be true for my last 12 years of serving in public education as well. So excited to have you run for this, David, really am. And I think you hit on a lot of the reasons why a lot of people in our state are so concerned about our education system. So we're excited to kind of hear more about you. You identified a few of these items already, but tell our citizens what makes you different from your opponents that are running.
Well, I think one of them is, I did a candidate forum in Spokane about 6 weeks ago at Ridgeline High School. And we were asked by one of the students if we support school choice or charter schools. Charter schools are already allowed in the state. There was initially around 35 of them. The initial experiment, half of those didn't make it, but we still have 19 charter schools across the state. I believe we need more of those, but the student asked if we support them or not. Both my opponents, Chris Reichdahl and Reed Sars, said they do not support charter schools. They want to keep all the state funding and all taxpayer money going into public education, but they do not support charter schools. I was the one on that panel that said, I do support charter schools. I don't believe parents should feel trapped that if their kids are going to a poor performing school, that they have no options. And so if there's a charter school that they could send their kid to, I believe they should have that opportunity. The State Board of Education recently came out after doing an extensive study that showed that charter schools particularly help students of color, minority, and high poverty students. And when I interviewed the Seattle Times a month ago to get their endorsement, they asked that same question. And Reed Sars and Chris Reichdahl again said they don't support charter schools. I said I do. And a week and a half ago, the Seattle Times, after seeing that report, said it's time for more charter schools. So even the Seattle Times believes we need more charter schools. So that was a win for me there. In the future, after the primary, if I want to seek their endorsement in the future. So that's one thing. Another one is Title IX. We were asked by those students, do we support boys competing against girls? Title IX was established in order to help girls have the opportunity for sports. And sometimes it's necessary that girls have to compete with boys if there's not a girls sport team. Particular years back, my sons were high school wrestlers, and we didn't have a dedicated female wrestling team at the time. My local high schools do now, but they had to wrestle or at least practice with their female wrestlers. But when they went out into competitions, they wrestled mostly boys around the state, but there were times when they had to wrestle females. And it's not as big a deal. People might disagree with me, but I've been there, so I know. It's not as big a deal when my sons were freshmen and sophomore and maybe wrestling at 115 or 126, and a young lady that's 115, 126, they're not physically different as much when they're 14 and 15 as they are when they're 16 and 17 and 18 after they've gone through puberty. Once they go through that, the boys get all that testosterone, they start to build muscle, girls go through all their changes with all the estrogen, and there becomes a disparate, absolute differentiation between boys and girls, biologically stronger. And so my sons, as juniors and seniors wrestling, would smoke a young lady, a female wrestler, because they were just so much stronger than the other wrestler. Same with other sports, soccer, tennis, and so forth. You know, as a parent of a daughter, my daughter played tennis and soccer in high school. I would not have wanted her to have to be competing against 185-pound, either on the soccer field or the tennis team.
Right.
So at the candidate forum in Spokane, we were asked if we support boys competing against girls. Both Reed Sars and Chris Reichdahl said they wanted to err on the side of inclusion. So they support boys competing against girls.
Wow.
I said, there's a law in the books, Title IX. I believe in following the law, but I did say I don't think it's fair for boys competing against girls. And one of the things you do if you don't like laws passed, but I said I don't think it's fair for boys to compete against girls. So those are two things that immediately stand out.
Yeah.
You know, that I think that
Oh,
go
yeah.
ahead.
It's just cutting out a little bit on our, I think
Oh.
we're okay, but that was where
Okay.
it just kind of cut out a couple times. So we'll keep going and hopefully we'll be okay.
We
Yeah,
had a
go ahead, Dave.
We had a debate last week. Again, it was a League of Education Voters. Questions again were from students, from high school students. And we were asked what we would do to resolve gun violence and and hate speech and anti-Semitism. Both my opponents went to gun violence, and I went to anti-Semitism and hate speech. And the reason I did that is that across the country, we're seeing all these hateful riots in our colleges, but there are also high schools in our state that allowed, or not, but school districts in our state that allowed their students to leave school and walk out and protest the war in Israel, in Gaza, and what's going on over there. And my opponents talked about guns. They did not touch the anti-Semitism and hate speech. I thought it was really important that people across the state heard me say, I do not support anti-Semitism. I do not support hate speech. I certainly don't support teachers and schools allowing their students to walk out when they're supposed to be in their class learning, to walk out and be hateful towards our Jewish population or be hateful towards any
Whoops.
Go
We
ahead.
lost, oh, there we go. We lost your audio again there for a second. It just went
Okay.
away. But I think we got the gist of that. And so, yeah, that's really important. Was there anything else that you wanted to say,
Yeah,
David?
I did follow up after I talked about hate speech and anti-Semitism. I did say that my school district last year, at the beginning of the last school year, my school board voted to change or hire armed school safety officers. So we hired a couple former police officers. They're not SROs, they're not police officers on campus. They are members of our district staff. They walk around school in plain clothes, but they are armed in each of our high schools. And we felt that was important to keep our staff and students safe. Across the state, some school districts have SROs, you know, uniformed police officers or sheriffs on campus. Some school districts say they don't want police on campus. But we've had several school shootings in the last couple of months, Garfield High School in Seattle being one, where a student shot and killed another student on the school campus. Perhaps if there was an SRO sitting in a police car or sheriff's vehicle, or if they knew there were armed people in the school, maybe that wouldn't happen. So I support either armed safety officers in the schools or partnering with local law enforcement to have school resource officers. So my opponents don't really support that too much, but I fully support that to keep our staff and students safe.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. And I just gotta say, I went to college on a golf scholarship. And I got that because got to play girls golf, right? And I wouldn't have had that opportunity had boys been, if I had to compete against biological boys. They can hit the ball, especially in high school, way farther than I can or could. And so I see, you know, those things are near and dear to me as well. So I think that's an important distinction and a way to protect our children. Actually came from a small town school, so I actually at one point did have to play against boys, you know,
Yeah.
but that was when I was younger and stuff. But again, I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity. So really appreciate you being an advocate for that. What are some of your other top policy priorities? We hear going into this, David, we hear people that are so concerned about, you know, returning back to academics per se. What, you know, tell us a little bit about some of your other priorities.
I think, I don't know if they're concerned about returning to academics. I think they're concerned that we're not focusing on academics, because Reichdahl certainly is not. The reason I got in this race was specifically to address academic failures in our current OSPI leadership. So I want to make sure that we're finding out. We have school districts across the state that are getting much more money than others, and their students academically are doing much worse. And I want to find out what's the cause of that. Why are we giving school districts and specific schools $8,000 or $10,000 per student more than other school districts, and their students are still at 30% reading and writing, and a school district getting 10,000 per student less, or 70 or 75% reading and writing. I want to investigate or audit those schools to find out what are they doing with that money, other than tossing it and wasting it, because that's important taxpayer money that goes to help educate our kids that is not being effectively utilized. One of the things that's really hurting school districts across the state is the lack of special education funding. So the percent of special ed funding across the board in our state, but they don't 100% fund special ed. They punted it to local school districts.
Ooh, we lost your audio again there.
So I don't know
We
what's
heard it.
going
There
on.
you go.
Okay. I don't know. My internet connection seems fine,
Yeah.
but the local school districts are not supposed to use their local levy money to pay for special ed. After the McCleary decision, levy money was only supposed to be for enhancements, like they'll pay for band, pay for sports and extra counselors, paraeducators, bus drivers, but not special ed. But the state is not funding special ed at the level they need. So they're turning their head and allowing local school districts to use levy money to pay for special ed. And that's really putting a strain on local school districts. And that's what's happening in Seattle Public School right now. They have a $115 million deficit. They're looking to close 20 elementary schools, but 90 million of their deficit is special ed. The other thing that the state, and specifically OSPI, is responsible for is transportation funding. And the STARS program is an acronym, but that is totally managed by OSPI to fund transportation. And that model is broken. It needs to be fixed. So when you're not funding transportation properly, you can't hire bus drivers. You can't pay them a good wage that would keep them in a school district and prevent them from going and being a CDL driver and driving a big rig, making a lot more money on the road. It makes it difficult to pay for fuel and to buy new buses. So that's another thing I want to do. So when I talk to superintendents across the state, the two biggest impacts in lack of special ed funding and transportation. So I want to definitely put a priority on fixing those two things. And also, when I go around the state and I talk to state reps in Spokane, state senators and state, they assure me that there is more than enough money in the state general fund to fully pay for education right now. It's just the state legislature is not choosing to pay for it. In 2019, 52% of our budget, of the state budget, went to education. Today, it's only 53%. So almost 10% less money. And so the state budget is around 75 billion with a B dollars. OSPI gets about 48% of that. So about $36 billion, $36 billion is managed by OSPI. So when Chris Reichdahl doesn't like what a school board's doing, he threatens to take their money. Okay, I will never do that. I will encourage school boards to spend their money the way they feel they need to academically assist their kids. Right now, Reichdahl and the state are pushing so many policies and procedures and regulations into the classrooms. It's making it challenging for school districts and school boards to spend the money the way they need to help their kids academically. And I don't support that. I support local control. So we still want to hold school districts and our teachers accountable to make sure our kids succeed academically, but I'd like to give them more freedom and more autonomy to spend the money where they feel they need it, because there's 295 school districts in the state, and each is different. So Seattle Public Schools is in a downtown urban Seattle, and you got Grandview, and you got Mapton, and you got all these different school districts. You got ag, and you got agriculture, and you got high tech, like in Seattle and Issaquah. They're all unique, and I believe the school boards are elected by their constituents and members of their community based on what that community feels is important. And if the school board doesn't do a good job, they'll vote them out. And so I'm fine with that. Go do what your community will support, spend the money the way you need to make sure your students are doing well. And the focus should be, in our school district, our strategic plan says we want 100% of all our third graders to be able to read by the time you leave third grade. Okay, all of them. Because studies have shown if students can't read at grade level by the time they leave third grade, it really impacts whether they can graduate or not. So our school district put a premium. We went all over the state. We learned about how to teach reading and writing, the science of reading and writing. And we went from 60% to 73% in the last 2 years. So we're going in the right direction. I want to make sure that other school districts are doing that and putting more of a focus on common sense education, getting our kids ready to be adults. And right now, Chris Reichdahl, there are school districts in the state that do not give a grade below C. So I've talked to parents across the state that said their daughter or their son can literally put their name on a test and turn it in without a single answer, and they will get a C. And Reichdahl's out there bragging about graduation rates. Well, no fooling. C, yes, they're going to graduate. But when they go to take the state assessment test, they can't pass a reading, writing, science, and math. So they're getting a degree, a high school diploma, going out in the world, and they can't read and write and balance their checkbook. Chris Reichdahl and the current leadership of OSPI is setting our children up for failure. And some people think that's intentional, that they want to dumb down our society for some kind of a grand takeover. I know that's quite a conspiracy. I don't really know if that's the case. But my focus, being married to a school teacher, my son's a school teacher, my sister, my sister-in-law, my stepmother are all in education. I want to make sure that we're setting up the future of our state, which is our children, to be successful. And that's why I'm running.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And you're pointing on the things that are super important, because if our kids aren't prepared to be adults, that's, we should just, throw out the graduation rates then, right? Because what does it mean? If it's not meaningful and they can't be successful, for either life or a job or future education in a college system, then we're not doing them service, and we're not being good, stewards of our taxpayer dollars. And that's ultimately what these elected positions are. Is you're elected to be good stewards of that, jurisdiction and those taxpayer dollars in our education system, right?
Yeah, I
So
want to be clear though, there's people, my opponents keep talking about we need more money. Okay, but I'm being told there's plenty of money, but the school districts need to be making sure they're efficiently and effectively spending the money they get. So I would want to do a thorough failing school districts and find out what are you doing with that money that's not working?
Right.
And get to the bottom root cause of that first before we send them any more money to be wasted. I want
Yeah.
to make sure taxpayer money is being effectively spent. And not just keep throwing money at a problem that's not being solved.
Well,
And
we've
so,
increased the amount of money that is going to schools. It may have decreased the percentage, but we've increased the total amount of money. And yet, as you started out this conversation, David, we are seeing declining results. So that
yeah,
is a terrible return on our
yeah,
investment right now. And I
yeah.
know you're going to help turn that around.
I think
Whoop,
10 years ago,
there you go.
before McCleary, 10 years ago, the state average for per student in education was about 9 or 10 grand. Okay. Now the state average is 18,000. And there's some schools that are getting $26,000 per school, per student. So in 10 years, we've almost more than doubled the spending per student, but academically across the state, we're going significantly the wrong direction.
Yeah.
How is that possible? What the hell's going on in our schools? My school district is doing very well. The Seattle Times even wrote about me and said, our school district, my school district, is doing much better than most. Okay. But that's because our emphasis is on teaching our kids how to read and write and do their math. And we're always focused on that. And we have principals always coming to us and having to explain to us why we're not performing. Okay. I want to make sure that all school districts are asking those tough questions. School boards must be asking those tough questions.
Yes.
They cannot be rubber stamping the school districts. They have to ask tough questions. And if the students are failing, the school boards need to be making massive changes and putting pressure on those school districts to start getting their act together.
Yep. And I can guarantee from one non-rubber stamper to another, David is not a rubber stamper. That's why I've seen him in action all these years and really appreciate that he's running for this office. David, final comments to our voters?
Well, I just want everyone to know I take this race seriously. The well-being and academic success of your kids and your grandkids and perhaps your great grandkids is really important to me. You know, I made a decision back in March to leave my well-paying six-figure job to run for this office full-time. I felt that to be committed and truly committed to this race, I couldn't do it in a 9-to-5 job, trying to travel all over the state, walk in parades, meet constituents, be at Lincoln Day dinners, be at picnics, whatever, fairs, King County Fair, whatever. I could not do it at a 9-to-5 job. And oftentimes there was weekend work. So I stepped away from my job. And my wife was sort of like a little bit uneasy about that, but she supports me, and I'm in this campaign to win. I need everyone that's watching to make sure you vote in the primary. Please tell all your friends to vote in the primary. If you're able to go to my website, electdavidolson.com, and make a contribution to my campaign that will help me with voter contact to get out the vote, I would appreciate that. And that's at OLSON, electdavidolson.com. Check out my website to learn more about me and possibly make a donation. I would really appreciate it.
Yes, and we want to do everything we can. Thank you for reminding voters about the primary. Listen, unless we vote for David in the primary, we may not get to vote for him in the general. And that's true with all of our endorsed candidates. So we've got our sample ballot that we're putting out to everybody in our community, and you can go to our website, SpokaneGOP.com as well. We've got David's information and link to his website on there, and as well as our other endorsed candidates. So this is a game changer for Washington State, for our future generations, for our children. We've got to change the trajectory of our education system here. And I believe David is the person to help do that. So David, thank you so much for spending time with us today and spending time for our voters to get to know you. We really appreciate you. And we're going to be doing everything we can to help get you elected.
All right, I appreciate it. And I always love getting out to Spokane and meeting everybody out there.
Yes, we love having you. So we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, David.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks.